There was another bombshell report from the Wall Street Journal this week regarding hush money payments made by one Vince McMahon to women who used to work for WWE, including now at least one former talent from the Diva Search era. This story just gets worse. We've gone from a $3 million agreement that was made earlier this year with a former paralegal to more than $12 million paid out to 4 different women, including the paralegal, over the past 16 years. That's what we know of, at least. Soon they're going to have enough women to put in a ladder match they can call it hush money in the bank. Per the latest story, the payouts went to 4 women, all formerly affiliated with WWE, who signed agreements with McMahon that prohibit them from discussing potential legal claims against or their relationships with him. This is according to people familiar with the deal, all the deals, as well as documents reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. The previously unreported settlements include a $7.5 million pact with a former wrestler who alleged that McMahon coerced her into giving him oral sex and then demoted her and ultimately declined to renew her contract in 2005 after she resisted further sexual encounters. The wrestler and her attorney approached Mr. McMahon in 2018 and negotiated the payment in return for her silence. This is according to people familiar with the matter. In another previously unreported deal, a WWE contractor presented the company with unsolicited nude photos of McMahon that she reported receiving from him and alleged that he had sexually harassed her on the job, according to people familiar with the woman's 2008 non-disclosure agreement. McMahon agreed to pay her roughly $1 million. And in a 2006 agreement, a former manager who had worked 10 years for McMahon, when they say manager, I don't think they mean wrestling manager. I think they're talking about somebody, kind of in an administrative position. But a former manager who worked 10 years for McMahon before he allegedly initiated a sexual relationship with her was paid $1 million to keep quiet about it. WWE's board of directors is investigating Mr. McMahon's agreement with the former paralegal and the 2018 deal with the former wrestler. Of course, McMahon isn't the only one under investigation here. Let us not forget that old Johnny Ace is part of this inquiry as well. The story mentions that the board is also investigating allegations that John Laurinitis had a sexual relationship with the same former paralegal. The board is also looking at a $1.5 million non-disclosure agreement reached in 2012 with an employee involving misconduct claims against Laurinitis, who had been the head of WWE talent relations for 8 years when he was forced to step down in 2012 and take a smaller role within the company. His demotion came around the same time as the payoff to the employee who alleged that she had an affair with Laurinitis and that he demoted her after she broke it off. McMahon had restored Laurinitis as head of talent relations last year, and WWE has since placed him on administrative leave. So they knew. Vince knew about the prior accusations against Laurinitis and the money and the NDA. They demoted him, only to then reinstall him back into the same position years later. They say birds of a feather flock together. Fightful spoke to people who believe Laurinitis has himself a nice golden parachute. So if he does not come back, and I don't see how he ever does this time, then he's not going to have to come back because he'll be taken care of financially. But the Wall Street Journal could not determine whether the investigation includes the non-disclosure agreements involving the contractor and the former manager, or how far back the probe will go. And as always, that is the key. How far back are they digging here? Because you know damn well we're only scratching the surface when it comes to the dirt on Vince McMahon. This guy has paid out more in hush money than he paid for all of WCW. WWE issued the following memo to their employees on Friday after the story broke. The Wall Street Journal has published a second story with expanded details on its initial report last month. We want to reiterate that we and our board of directors take these allegations seriously. We've been cooperating fully with the investigation led by our board of directors and will continue to do so until its conclusion. Please note that upon its conclusion, WWE leadership will make itself available to answer any questions that you may have. Oh, I have questions. They still haven't said if the findings of the law firm that's investigating is even going to be made public. You would assume that, to some extent, we will find out exactly what those findings are, but they've never, I don't believe, actually come out and said that. What level of transparency, if any, is there even going to be at the end of all this? Nor have they said if they or the board makes any recommendation upon the conclusion of this investigation, if Vince McMahon is actually going to follow that recommendation. Right? Because just because they say he's cooperating fully doesn't mean that if they find he should step down, that he would actually do so. Coincidentally, we had a man this week by the name of Connor Schell. Now, you may have never heard of him before. I may have never heard of him before. I don't know who the fuck this guy is, other than he was on the WWE Board of Directors, and this week Connor Schell resigned from his position on the WWE Board of Directors just 2 days before the Wall Street Journal story broke. Now, the reason given was an increased slate of responsibilities resulting from his expanded role at the newly formed The North Road Company, which is the company that he works for. He said that his quitting had nothing to do with any dispute or disagreement with the company, its management, or the board on any matter relating to WWE operations, policies, or practices. So that's what he says, but boy, that timing sure is something, isn't it? How much more of this are they going to tolerate? How many other stories? How many other surprises? How many other NDAs? What's the number that has to be hit? What's the quota that has to be reached before they say, okay, this is ridiculous, enough is enough? I mean, I'm not expecting them to make any kind of public declaration or recommendation until the investigation is over. I'm just asking in general, at what point do we sort of reach that critical mass where it's like, okay, we've got to make a change here? Every story is a bigger black eye for the company than the one before it. Every story just gets worse and worse and makes him look even scummier than he already does. Now, wrestling is not exactly looked at in the best light to begin with, publicly, but it is a publicly traded company. They are trying to be more of a company that does business with all these big sponsors and companies, right, and cleaned up its image from what it used to be. So if that's the kind of company they want to be, again, every single time there's a story like this that comes out, it's a bigger black eye for the company as a whole. Sean Ross Sapp on Fightful Select, he noted that multiple WWE staffers reacted to the news that McMahon paid off several other women to keep quiet about inappropriate sexual encounters by, perhaps out of frustration, sharing his true reaction. They finally came out and shared his reaction to the allegations after the first story broke all those weeks ago. Fightful was contacted by multiple WWE staff, including some who had remained quiet in the past about McMahon's handling of the situation. One told Fightful that they wished they had spoken out sooner and said that McMahon's response would often go from no-selling the entire thing to being defiant. And they said that after McMahon's pointless June 17th appearance on SmackDown, which was the day the first story broke, he returned to the gorilla position and shouted, "Fuck 'em," seemingly in response to the allegations that caused his entire insistence to even be on television in the first place. That's what got him into this mess in the first place. But that confirms what I said on that first podcast I did after the story broke. What did I say? I said the only reason Vince McMahon went out on television that Friday, and again that Monday, was to send a message. He had one purpose in making those appearances, and it was not to put over John Cena as the greatest of all time. That's not why he went out there. It wasn't for that. It wasn't because he thought that this might be some sort of farewell to the WWE Universe. I don't know how this is going to end up. This is my way of saying goodbye. That's not what it was either. He did it because he wanted to make it clear to everybody that he wasn't going anywhere and that he still runs this place. So he can step aside temporarily and let Stephanie take over as CEO, but it is still very much the Vince McMahon show. That was the only reason that he did that. Everything to him is a fight. It's in his personality. It's in his DNA. Everything is a fight. The U.S. government came after him and he fought back, right? You have to fight. WCW was beating him. He fought back. They started coming after the company when Linda was running for Senate in Connecticut. We end up with Vince on television asking the fans to stand up for WWE. Remember that whole campaign? He went on television asking fans to stand up for WWE. He went on Pat McAfee's show in March, only a few months ago, right before the first email came into the board of directors, and admitted that he tunes out any negativity, any kind of negative feedback on the internet to his creative ideas, all of it. He tunes out all of it and pays no attention to any of it. His natural instinct with everything, including the fans and anybody who disagrees with him, is to say, fuck him, and to fight back. Only this time, he may have dug his own grave, and it's a hole so big that he can't climb out of. The impact of all of this is already being felt with the news from Denise Salcedo that Netflix has quietly dropped its planned documentary series on Vince McMahon, which was just about wrapped up. That was a big deal when they first announced it, and the company was cooperating, and they were filming stuff for it, and it was almost done. It's not as if they hadn't started filming yet. They were deep into it, and according to her sources, they have pulled the plug on the project. She tweeted, "Sources tell me that the Vince McMahon Netflix documentary has been pulled and is off the programming spreadsheet at Netflix. A source at Netflix confirmed it is no longer being listed on their spreadsheet. Another source said that shit's out of here." Another person indicated that the project was already deep into post-production and that several talent interviews had been done months ago and millions of dollars were spent. I spoke to one of the producers on the project, however, they declined to confirm or deny this story to me. For the past couple of days, people on social media have been playing private eye, trying to figure out the name of the diva that Vince paid the $7.5 million to. It was a woman who got a push and then was demoted and then ultimately let go when her contract expired. It's not that hard to try to figure out who it is if that's the sort of thing you want to do. I'm not going to partake in any of that, nor am I going to throw out any possible names, because it doesn't matter who it is. If this person wants to come forward publicly and tell her story or break her NDA or whatever, then that's what she'll do. And without knowing for sure 100% who it is, it would be irresponsible to throw out random names anyway, and then you end up naming people who may have absolutely nothing to do with any of this, and don't want to have anything to do with any of this. So I'm not going to do that. The bigger issue here is what Vince McMahon is accused of doing. This person claims that she was coerced into giving him oral sex. That's very similar to the Rita Chatterton story. Remember, Rita Chatterton accused him of exactly the same thing, and that was decades ago. But then there's the contractor who not only claimed that he sexually harassed her on the job, but actually presented the company with nude photos of him, which she claims were unsolicited nude photographs that he sent to her. People have been saying, what if what Vince did was so bad, then why did the wrestler wait 13 years to go get money out of him? Or why didn't she just run to the cops if it was something that she was forced into doing that she didn't want to do? Or what's the big deal if he paid with his own money and not company funds, then what's the problem? What's the big deal that he had a consensual relationship with the paralegal? They're two consenting adults. I am blown away by how many people have jumped to this man's defense with some of the absolute worst takes that I have ever seen. I said on the SmackDown post show, I don't know if it's a case where social media has made people dumber, or if they were already this stupid and social media just gave them a platform for the rest of us to see it. I tend to think it's a little bit of both. But let's break this down. WWE and Jerry McDevitt, they're the ones who claim that the relationship with the paralegal was consensual. It may have been, but that is the company's version of it. We have not actually heard from the woman herself. Only a friend of hers leaked this to the board, which is what got the ball rolling on this entire thing. that her friend was scared and she just felt the need to come forward. She was so concerned about what the friend had told her that she saw fit to email the board of directors about this. So let's not assume anything was consensual just because the company said that it was. That's why there's an ongoing investigation. Innocent until proven guilty. I've heard this thrown around a lot this week too. Unless he's charged with a crime or he's convicted of a crime, these people, they stand with Vince like he's their buddy. This is not an episode of Law & Order. Vince McMahon is not on trial. Even if crimes were committed, it's not as if they're going to slap the cuffs on and throw an orange jumpsuit on him. I mean, we are talking about allegations of sexual misconduct, but I doubt this ever becomes any sort of legal issue for him. We're not talking about Vince going to prison. This is not the government coming after him in 94 where they're going to throw him in the slammer for 10 years. That's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is mounting evidence of an executive, the chief executive of a company who has doled out millions of dollars to keep these women quiet for a reason. He is buying their silence for a reason, and he is accused of abusing his power. That is what this is about. This is an abuse of power. A man who allegedly took advantage of his position. You can argue all you want until you're blue in the face that if the women went along with it, then how is it his fault? If it turns out that it was a consensual relationship, what's the problem? The problem is that even if the other person chose of her own free will to engage in a relationship with her boss, Vince McMahon, he is the boss. He is the emperor of WWE. Nobody gets pushed without him wanting them to get a push. Nobody gets television time without him wanting to get television time for that person. Nobody is given a championship without him wanting them to have a championship and to be one of the faces of his company. Do you see the picture I'm painting here? If somebody wants a raise, they don't get one without him approving it because he's the one who signs the checks. So if he had the hots for one of the divas, and I'm sure he had the hots for all of them, even got to work with some of them on TV. If he had the hots for one of the divas and we know why, now we know why he had Johnny Ace picking people out of swimsuit catalogs, that makes it even more fucking disgusting. But you will only go so far in that company as far as he wants you to go. So if he came on to any of these women, or if he wanted to have sex with them, or he wanted to start a relationship with them, you don't think that these women didn't feel any pressure to say yes? Even possibly feel pressure to say yes for fear of losing their job, losing their spot, losing their push if they were getting a push? You know, you have to consider the time period as well. This was 2005. There was no WCW anymore. TNA was still in its infancy. They were 3 years in. They weren't nearly as big as AEW is after their first 3 years. There was no AEW back then. If you wanted to work for a major wrestling promotion and be on worldwide television and become a star and make the most money, there was only one person to work for. And that's Vince McMahon. And if you can't see what's wrong with that, then you must have a thick skull because there's no getting through to you. That's the real issue here. According to Fightful, it was a running joke in the writer's room. One former writer they spoke to said that Vince's relationships would be a half-joking excuse as to why he was late to meetings before TV. It's not as if people didn't suspect or know what was going on. What he did was wrong, plain and simple. Were it not for this email to the board, he might have gotten away with it without us even knowing about it. Even his own lawyer, arguing that it was all consensual, is an admission that there was something going on. And in my opinion, that's all the board needs to know to recommend this guy's immediate and full resignation. The time has come. It has been long overdue. Vince McMahon, for the good of his own company, needs to resign from WWE. Right now, he has temporarily stepped aside while the investigation continues. He is no longer, at this exact moment, he is no longer the chairman and CEO. I think the belief is that when this is over, he'll be right back in the chair. And even now, he's still head of creative. He's still at every show. He's running things like business as usual. Vince McMahon needs to resign from all of his duties in WWE. Not just as chairman and CEO, but creative too. All of it. He needs to be gone. Now, that's not going to be easy because his shares in the company still afford him more voting power than anybody else. I mean, it's ridiculous how much voting power he has. If he doesn't want to go, it's going to be very difficult to force him out. But the board can put pressure on him to step down. Sponsors and network partners can put pressure on him to step down for the good of the company. How many more of these stories are going to leak before one of these companies washes their hands of them altogether and says, you know what, these are not the kind of people that we want to be doing business with? They've worked so hard. They've tried to work so hard. They brought in Nick Khan. They did all these things. They made all these moves to improve the image of their company, right? To become a classier company. And it's all just going to get flushed right down the fucking toilet because it's only going to get worse. At what point does him still being there start to have a negative effect on business? At what point does he start to become a liability to this company? It hasn't happened yet. The stock price is stabilized. But they've also got two very important television deals coming up for renewal at the end of next year. One of those partners that they're working with, one of those partners they got $1 billion from, is Fox. Roger Ailes used to be the head of Fox News. He too had allegations of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct levied against him. Right? One of his former anchors actually filed a lawsuit against him for sexual harassment. She said she was fired for turning down his advances. And that led to more than a dozen other employees to come forward to tell their stories. This guy was one of the most powerful men in all of media. He was far more powerful than Vince McMahon has ever been in his entire life. He was defiant, but then when the company did their internal review and all of a sudden that internal review expanded to other aspects of his time working there, his bosses saw this and said, you know what, it's time for him to go. And they gave him an ultimatum, resign or be fired. Now that's a little bit different because Ailes answered to his own boss. Vince is the boss. It's his company. That's the big difference. But if he really cared about his company, then he would walk away and spare it any further embarrassment. You know, there's lots of reasons for him to step aside. This honestly, what I'm about to mention here isn't even really important compared to all this other stuff. I watched that SmackDown show on Friday night. SmackDown was an abysmal show this week. Shouldn't come as a surprise. According to PW Insider, that was 100% Vince McMahon's creative vision for what he wanted that show to be. We had a whopping 13 minutes of wrestling on a 2-hour show. At least if the non-wrestling stuff was entertaining, I could excuse it, but it wasn't. This company has long needed a creative cleanse. And that just isn't going to happen so long as Mr. Happy Pants is running creative. It's not going to happen. Nothing is going to change. But the creative issue is one of many reasons why he needs to go. There was a very telling line at the end of the USA Today article on Friday because everybody covered this. I mean, the Wall Street Journal broke the story, but it's the Wall Street Journal, right? So all of these media outlets are picking up this story. AP, Reuters, USA Today, the New York Times, all of it. USA Today, at the end of their article on Friday, they had a line in there that said this: WWE has admitted to investors that the success of the company hinges on McMahon standing as its leader. Now, I don't know where and when they admitted that. A lot of publicly traded companies would say that losing their chairman and CEO would be a big risk. But a lot of people have parroted this line that, without Vince McMahon, this company's going to be in a lot of trouble. As if the company, which has guaranteed money coming out of every fucking orifice, is somehow going to shrivel up and die without Vince McMahon. I got news for you. The man is 76 years old. He ain't going to be around forever. If you're a shareholder, that does not sound like something that would inspire a lot of confidence. That the success of this billion-dollar business rests on the shoulders of one man, who happens to be 76 years old. That sounds like something Vince McMahon would say. This company can't survive without me. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one feeding that line to people. I'm sure he wants people to think that, because the more people who believe it, the more likely it is they turn a blind eye to all the shit that he does. WWE would still make money hand over fist and do just fine without Vince McMahon. They are not going to die. They are not going to, it's not going to be some epic collapse. They're big enough that they're going to do just fine. Vince McMahon will go down as the greatest wrestling promoter of all time, which is funny, seeing as how he doesn't seem to be such a big fan of actual wrestling. But he is the most successful wrestling promoter of all time, bar none. He took a company on the brink of bankruptcy, he turned it into $1 billion business. He had a lot of help along the way from all the talent that worked for him, but he can hang his hat on that. That is part of his legacy. Nobody can take that away from him. But this is now part of his legacy too. And it's only going to get worse. People like Vince McMahon and John Laurinitis have no business being in positions of power. They abused that power. And now they need to go.